is an appropriate setting for the meeting of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the NDP. Canadians can envisage many scary scenarios. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister's anti-Kyoto ideology is the scariest of all. If actually implemented, it will lead to a global nightmare. What's more, his government's ideological approach to climate change is a global embarrassment for Canada. Doesn't the Prime Minister recognize that it's a complete international travesty for Canada to be chairing next week's global conference in Kenya on climate change when he and George Bush are the two leaders in the world most opposed to implementing the Kyoto Protocol, Mr. Speaker?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister of the Environment has done an excellent job in representing Canada and pushing forward the view that we need an effective international treaty on climate change. As for my meeting with the Leader of the NDP, of course, I'm looking forward to it, Mr. Speaker, and I guarantee at that meeting we will not rewrite the budget.
Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition has the floor.
Well, hopefully, Mr. Speaker, somebody will start rewriting the lines for the present Minister of the Environment. Yeah. We're talking about dangerous and violent weather patterns, millions of people thrown into poverty and starvation, unprecedented crop failures, extinction of thousands of species, tsunamis, typhoons, $7 trillion in economic havoc. Does the Prime Minister not appreciate the terrible irony that his government is chairing a global meeting in Africa when his approach will lead to disaster for that already overburdened continent, Mr. Speaker?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thought for a moment the Leader of the Opposition was reading the record of the Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, the approach that this government has brought forward on air quality is the following. We include air pollution targets along with greenhouse gas targets. We're seeking real greenhouse gas reductions in this country, and we will have a national compulsory standard of targets. These are all things that go way beyond what the Liberal Party ever contemplated.
The
Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the meeting in Kenya is dealing with international standards for 2012, not 2050. This government does not want to do anything before 2050. This is unacceptable. Why is this government refusing to invite environmentalists along with the Canadian delegations? Is it afraid to have witnesses when it is doing absolutely nothing to protect future generations against a human, environmental, and environmental disaster? The Honourable Prime Minister. The statement made by the Leader of the Opposition is completely false. The reality is that we will have targets for greenhouse gases and for pollution next year. We will have targets for both. We will have greenhouse gas reductions for Canada and national mandatory targets. This is a great step forward compared with the Liberals who failed for 13 years to do anything. The Honourable Member for Westmount-Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, in Quebec, people don't know what to think when it comes to the Minister of the Environment. On October 20th, she said that the government of Quebec had come up with an excellent environmental plan, but yesterday she said that the Conservative government was worried about the Quebec government's approach. The people in Quebec are concerned about the lack of leadership by the Minister of the Environment. Why has she changed her mind? Why is she undermining her little credibility? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition needs to understand that the Air Quality Act is intended to protect the health of Canadians and Quebecers as well. I would quote an environmental group that said that this is a very good act. Therefore, we can explain to Canadians that this is crucial legislation. The honourable member for Westmount-Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, that was not the question. The minister said earlier that Quebec had a good plan, and now she has changed her mind. The Quebec has a plan that is accepted by all stakeholders. A coalition has been set up to oppose the Conservative government's approach, and suddenly the minister is criticizing the Quebec government. Why is she criticizing the government now? Why has she changed her mind? She needs to listen to Canadians. The Honourable Minister of the Environment, the Liberals know that the Conservative government is right. They are trying to conquer and divide. We are addressing climate change and pollution, greenhouse gases. The Canadian public should know why the Liberals are opposing these strict regulations. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. The Canadian government is attending the meeting, the international meeting to reject the Kyoto Accord. In Germany, there has been important strides forward. The government here, though, is talking more about long-term objectives. How can the Prime Minister send his Minister of the Environment to attend this meeting when their intention is to sabotage the Kyoto Accord? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I do not at all accept the statement made by the leader of the Bloc Québécois. The Environment Minister is doing an excellent job. She is the co-chair of the international process, and we need to work toward an effective international agreement on greenhouse gases. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. As was said yesterday, the former chief economist of the World Bank indicated that that climate change would have catastrophic economic circumstances. Therefore, the government needs to act now. Could the minister please introduce real targets, because 2050 is not realistic? The government, the Prime Minister, needs to say that he agree with the Kyoto objectives, not sabotage them. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what the Bloc Québécois leader is saying is false. Our plan will have targets as of next year. This plan goes up to 2050, but it does not start in 2050. We need to start on this process. We need to have a plan adopted by the House of Commons. We will be proposing a plan. The Bloc Québécois has proposed nothing. We need to work toward our objectives. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. The Bloc has made concrete proposals. The government is torpedoing the Kyoto Accord not only outside but inside the country. The Quebec government needs the $28 million that it deserves for the environment. The Liberals did not provide this money, but does the federal government not realize that immediately the $328 million that was earmarked for Quebec needs to be provided immediately? The Right Honourable Environment Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our plan goes further than the Kyoto Accord. We are the first to have introduced legislation to deal with climate change and air quality. Canadians and Quebecers will wonder why the Bloc Québécois is against strict regulations for industry in Quebec. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. In fact, greenhouse gases have emissions have been reduced by 7%, whereas across Canada there has been an increase of 30%. How can the federal government not trust the Quebec government's approach when it has given excellent results? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have to add that this government has created trusts with the provinces. We have put in $300 million into Quebec as well as into Ontario and other provinces. But, Mr. Speaker, I accept with great interest the support by the Bloc Québécois for the changes that we want to bring in. The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
To hurt farm families and to kill jobs on the prairies. You know, the wheat board belongs to the farmers, and yet the hand-picked panel of the Prime Minister came out with a recommendation that the CEO and the board should be dismissed without even a vote by the farmers who own the wheat board. And now we have Saskatchewan joining with Manitoba, rightly, in calling for the voice of farmers to be heard through a fair vote on the question of the future of the wheat board. Even the Conservatives in Manitoba go along with this idea. So why won't the government stop force-feeding its ideology to farmers here in Canada and give the farmers a fair vote on the future of the wheat board?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the leader of the NDP is aware, the Conservative Party of Canada supports marketing choice for Western Canadian farmers. That's one of the reasons we won virtually every rural seat in Western Canada in the last federal election campaign. But as I've said repeatedly, Mr. Speaker, this government never fears to consult with Western farmers, and we look forward to hearing their views.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
You know, it's that kind of arrogance that's going to turn people off, and we'll see what happens in the next election, Mr. Speaker. You know, and the Prime Minister says he wants to consult with farmers, and then they take a third of them off the voters list of the wheat board. The fact is, it's going to kill jobs if you kill the wheat board, and it's not just going to hurt the farmers, it'll take jobs away from communities. The mayor of Churchill pointed out that if you lose the port of Churchill, it's going to cause jobs, and there's going to be all kinds of dependent jobs lost as well. And despite the cackling from the peanut gallery over here, who have no interest in listening to farmers, my question is, you know, they wanted in, I guess it was they wanted farmers in the unemployment line. Will we get a fair vote or not for farmers in the...
Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Speaker, of course, this government has consistently campaigned on and promised a marketing choice for Western Canadian grain farmers. Mr. Speaker, we continue to ask for Western Canadian grain farmers what all farmers in the rest of Canada have, which is an option to market their products as they see fit. We see a strong, viable Canadian wheat board. The task force report that I tabled yesterday charts a path forward. We welcome debate on that task force report, Mr. Speaker. It does, for the first time, block out how that might happen. And, Mr. Speaker, we, of course, look forward to farmers' input on that task force report, Mr. Speaker. We're always interested in what they have to say.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
Environmental groups agree that this minority Conservative government's environmental plan is a disaster, and today the NDP abandoned Kyoto as well. This Dead Air Act rips the heart out of existing environmental protection legislation, leaving Canada with a fragmented, uncoordinated, and piecemeal Environmental Protection Act. No amount of tinkering with this disaster will salvage it. It is simply wrong-headed. When will this government withdraw this fraud of a bill and bring forward a genuine plan on global warming?
The Honourable the Minister of the Environment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's rich coming from the party that has no plan on global warming. Exactly. Opposite knows full well that the Clean Air Act is made up of amendments to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to strengthen it so that we can regulate every industry sector across this country for both greenhouse gases and air pollution. So I would encourage him to work with us to strengthen the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and the other acts that we're looking to strengthen and support the Clean Air Act.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
This government's cop-out plan on global warming has no short-term targets, no medium targets, and no action on greenhouse gases for 50 years. While the Conservatives talk, greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. This Dead Air Act is a sham. It is a smokescreen designed to avoid doing anything real on global warming. No amendments to this bill could ever change that fact. When will the Minister withdraw this embarrassing mistake?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would point out to the Honourable Member, I believe the Liberal leadership candidate he's supporting has the same target that this government has adopted that was recommended by the National Roundtable on the Environment and Economy. And I would also suggest to him that we won't do what that former government did and set arbitrary targets. We've given our word to the provinces and territories that we will work with them over the coming months, and we will set short-term targets in the very near future. And I hope that his party will work with us to make sure we can implement them.
The Honourable Member for Honoré-Mercier. Mr. Speaker, in June, the Environment Minister said that she was enthusiastic about Quebec's environmental plan to deal with climate change, but now she said she is worried. She is therefore refusing to give Quebec the $328 million that it is calling for. Instead of criticizing Quebec's plan, which has short-term realistic goals, why not provide the $328 million earmarked for Quebec right now? The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Work with every province and territory on establishing short-term targets, including the province of Quebec. Mr. Speaker, my only concern was the fact that some provinces use voluntary targets. Obviously, we'll be working with every industry sector across this country because we're moving from voluntary targets to strict regulation.
The Honourable Member for Honoré-Mercier. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago I talked about the impact of climate change on public health, the melting of glaciers in the north, coastal flooding, and basically the future of our children and grandchildren. But Conservatives laughed at what I said. Yesterday, Sir Nicholas Stern, former chief economist of the World Bank, talked about those same consequences, but in financial terms. If the government remains insensitive about the fate of human beings, is it not at least worried about the economic impact? The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Speaker, we understand the opposition's fear of the unknown because it is a new thing for them to consider that a government would bring forward for the first time a piece of legislation to actually deal with climate change and clean air in Canada. So I would ask him to put his fear aside of the unknown, work with the government, and get this piece of legislation through so we can move on and address climate change and clean air.
Honourable Member for Longueuil-Pierre Boucher. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in Radio-Canada, Mr. Galbeau talked about the terrible situation of certain Afghan women. Some of them managed to get away, but the minister surely was aware of the situation after visiting, and is anything being done? The Honourable Minister for International Cooperation. Yes, when I was in Afghanistan, I met with the minister responsible for the status of women and women's affairs in Kandahar. We discussed the situation and challenges for women who had no rights a few years ago and who now can count on a constitution. That said, with respect to CEDA's programs for women in Afghanistan, I would like to mention a few. $14.5 million for education, $5 million for integration of women into the workforce. And those are just a couple. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Pierre Boucher. Despite what the Minister has said, the Women's Development Plan under the UN has indicated that women have very little ability to get out of their difficult situation. Should we not, therefore, increase substantially our humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan? The Honourable Minister for International Cooperation. The first major decision of this government help women in Afghanistan was to increase what the Liberal government had provided, which was a decrease. Now we have $100 million a year going to Afghanistan. What I understand is that we can depend on Bloc Québécois members so that women in Afghanistan never go back to the dark regime of the Taliban. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lilley-Makamasca, Rivière-du-Loup. The Industry Minister has decided to open up the telecommunications industry. He is refusing to listen to the president of ADISC, who says that this threatens Quebec culture. Will he not wait for the decision and suspend the work of the CRTC? The Honourable Minister of Industry, I'm a bit surprised that the Bloc Québécois critic is saying that I said these things about the telecommunications industry. In fact, we gave direction to the CRTC to try to provide a more open approach, but there is nothing about foreign investment. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lilley-Makamasca, this directive means that the deregulation, radical deregulation, will threaten our culture in regions there may not be any service. Is the minister aware that he needs to suspend this directive as requested by the Industry Committee? The Honourable Minister. I met myself with consumers groups and talked to them yesterday. They expressed their concern. They said, in contrast to what the Bloc Québécois member has said, that they want to have services. We want competitive services for them, though.
This new government can take credit for.
I'm sure the Honourable Member from Malpeque appreciates all the help with this question, but I think he's got something in his hand and he's ready to proceed with it.
New government can take credit for one thing, Mr. Speaker. They've established a new low for task force reports. The Minchie's report completely fails to address the key question of who will benefit from this government's attempt to destroy the Canadian Wheat Board. No witness list, no public consultations, no economic analysis, no authority from farmers as to its recommendations. Will the minister admit this report is nothing but a complete farce, garbage the report as conservative waste, and allow producers a vote as established by law?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
The party and this government is keen on doing, Mr. Speaker, is giving marketing choice for farmers. We want to do that in an environment that has a strong, viable, voluntary wheat board in a marketing choice environment. Mr. Speaker, we believe that farmers are capable and want to make choices on how they market their grains. And Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to me that the Honourable Member from Malpeque never suggests expanding the wheat board to include Ontario farmers, Quebec farmers, or for that matter, potato farmers and PEI.
Honourable
And
Member
Mr.
from
Speaker,
Malpeque.
the minister should give farmers the right to vote. This report was written by and for grain companies. What about Canadian producers? The U.S. has tried 11 times to challenge the wheat board and lost every time. A U.S. wheat industry source said the timeline is not crucial to the United States producers so long as Canada eliminates the monopoly powers of the board. Why is the government selling out to the United States grain trade and pilfering farmers for $655 million?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but the Honourable Member should remember he's no longer the President of the National Farmers Union. He's a Member of Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, we're trying to represent the marketing choice option for Canadian farmers. With this task force report, Mr. Speaker, not only gives a staged transition to marketing choice and a strong, viable wheat board, it also suggests that the Canadian farmers themselves will want to eventually own and not only run but own the Canadian wheat board. Mr. Speaker, we think there's money to be made on the wheat board. With the wheat board, we will always encourage those farmers that want to take part and use the Canadian wheat board to use it henceforth.
Honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, there can be no doubt that the plot from the minister's one-sided task force to kill the Canadian wheat board would trigger the producer plebiscite laid out in Section 47(1) of the Canadian Wheat Board Act. Right. Farmers have the legal right to a fair and democratic vote on any change to the wheat board's marketing mandate. That right is enshrined in the law now. Why will the minister not give all farmers his absolute guarantee that their legal rights will be fully respected? Why is he so afraid to let farmers vote?
Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I'm always interested when the member from Wascana talks about legal rights, like the time, Mr. Speaker, he and his government threw hard-working Canadian farmers in jail for marketing their own products. Mr. Speaker, we're not interested in that. We think that Western Canadian grain farmers want the option to market their products with the Canadian wheat board, outside of the wheat board, Mr. Speaker, and we see a strong, viable wheat board in a marketing choice world, unlike the restrictive views of the party opposite.
Honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, either you have a single-desk marketing system or you don't. The minister cannot suck and blow at the same time. Look at this government's ham-fisted, underhanded, bloody-minded behavior. Private meetings from which the majority of farmers are barred. A task force that's biased and stacked from the outset. A phony letter-writing campaign. A gag order to muzzle the board. Directors under personal threat to shut them up. The voters list suddenly slashed by 16,000. Why is this minority Conservative government bullying farmers and trampling, Mr. Speaker, on farmers' rights?
It'd be helpful if we had a little order so we can hear the questions and the answers. We'll now hear an answer from the Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Honourable member from Wascana for his prophetic words on the next majority government, Mr. Speaker. But really, Mr. Speaker, again, it comes down to a matter of what we campaigned on the last campaign. We believe that Western Canadian farmers want marketing choice when it comes to marketing their grain products. We believe in a strong, viable, voluntary wheat board, Mr. Speaker. This task force report charted a path forward, a potential path forward. We're interested to hear from farmers what they think about that. Mr. Speaker, speaking of rights, the farmers that he threw in jail had damn few.
The Honourable Deputy.
The Honourable Navi Belchas. Order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many years, the softwood industry in Canada has suffered from the Liberals' inaction and the Bloc's inability to take action, a party that is eternally in opposition. The former government spent in 4 years, Mr. Speaker, more than $40 million in legal fees, but was unable to put an end to the softwood lumber crisis. Thanks to the action of the new government, the Canadian forestry industry can now look to the future with optimism. Can the Minister of Industry inform this chamber of recent developments in this file? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A very good question, and I'm pleased to announce that yesterday the Quebec and Canadian forestry industry began receiving the refund, Mr. Speaker. And that, Mr. Speaker, the president of Tembec said that they received the money 6 weeks earlier than expected, so we're ahead of schedule. So industry is going to be able to deal with their cash flow programs and their problems, and the companies are going to be more productive, Mr. Speaker.
Winnipeg North.
Canadians know that the Liberal Conservative mission in Afghanistan is unbalanced. For every dollar on aid, a whopping $9 is spent on combat. Yesterday, the Treasury Board released its estimates. Could the Minister please inform this House how much of the $200 million going to Afghanistan will be committed to reconstruction and relief versus the money spent on counterinsurgency and combat?
Honourable the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the money going to Afghanistan is in support of our troops. It's in support of the battle group. It's in support of the PRT. So it is all there for all the troops in Afghanistan.
Right on. Honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Well, clearly, Mr. Speaker, this government is trying to hide the real costs to taxpayers for its war in Afghanistan. It hides costs that are directly associated with our participation in Kandahar in other line items. For example, we know that recruitment is directly related to the mission, yet the costs for recruitment are registered elsewhere. So to the Minister, of the $1 billion allocated for defence, how much would have been necessary to sustain the forces had the Liberals not originally signed Canada up for George Bush's war on terror?
The Honourable the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of the commitment in 2002 until today, the incremental costs for Afghanistan are about $2.1 billion, period.
Honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, it's embarrassing. The Human Resources Minister, who had $153 million slashed from her department, could not give a single specific example of one of those cuts at committee today. While she couldn't be bothered to get the details of cuts to students, homeless people, and adults learning to read, she compared them to having to do without a cup of coffee. Is she taking her cue from the Treasury Board President who dismissed adult literacy training as repair work after the fact? Or will she now apologize to Canadians for these callous comments?
Honourable the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Canadians want a government for a change that would respect the taxpayers' dollars. We have identified $100 million within my department out of a total of over $80 billion, Mr. Speaker. That's less than 0.2%. 0.2%. What we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is we're cutting money for programs that aren't delivering results for Canadians.
Honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, several times in this House and at committee, the Minister has falsely claimed that she has consulted widely with groups about these cuts. Widely, Mr. Speaker. But she can't list any. She cannot list one group she consulted before making these cuts. While she sees no value in meeting with literacy groups, she can file a $3,000 travel claim for a symbolic check presentation. Mr. Speaker, why is a photo op value for money when consulting Canadians is not?
Honourable the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is exactly right. We consulted with Canadians on January 23rd, and they chose this government because they wanted responsible spending. They did not want their money being spent on $71,000 to upgrade a website, $80,000 to build a website, $30,000 for an executive director to do 90 days' work. Mr. Speaker, we're spending the money well. We're spending it on programs that will deliver real results for real Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government extended funding for the Partnership Initiative for Communities, SCIPPY. This was the cornerstone of a national strategy for the homeless, and the federal funding was going to be used to attract additional investments in communities. The $235 million which was earmarked for this project is set to expire. We would like to know whether the Minister can tell this House whether she intends to renew funding for this program. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
In this House before, we do have a responsibility to Canadians to review all programs to make sure they're spent well. And, Mr. Speaker, we also have to take care of the most vulnerable. That's why we extended the SCIPPY program and added $37 million to it. That gives us a chance to review how well that program works while we look for alternatives that may be, Mr. Speaker, even better so that we can go forward and take care of this vulnerable part of our society.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Quebec, Mr. Speaker, needs Skippy, and the needs are great. Under Skippy, they've gone through their Skippy funds more than other provinces. Does the minister recognize that Quebec has an urgent need for funding as part of the Skippy program, and how much will Quebec have? Please tell us. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Here, there's an urgent need right across this country to deal with the homeless situation. That's why we made another $37 million available, money that the previous government chose not to spend on the homeless because it was unspent from last year. We're going forward based on the need across this country to ensure that our homeless are as well taken care of as we can possibly make them.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Union of Producers in Quebec sounded the alarm. They have a crisis in Saint-Amable. They're suffering a lot of losses, and the region has been put in quarantine because of the discovery of golden nematode. What specific measures will the Minister of Agriculture adopt to help these producers, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
We were able, of course, to very quickly to work with the Quebec government and with other departmental and CFIA officials to regionalize that problem very quickly to Saint-Amable. There's now down to about 20 to 25 farmers that have been affected. We're working closely with the Minister of Agriculture in Quebec, with MAPAC, CFIA, and hope to come up within days with a package of proposals that the farmers will find suitable. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Discussions need to lead to action. The producers in Saint-Amable are going through an exceptional situation and they need exceptional measures. The American border was partially opened on October 16th, but the reality is still very dramatic. What is the minister waiting for to implement a program to help the Saint-Amable producers, as was recommended by the Agriculture Committee this morning by voting unanimously in favor of a motion from the Bloc Québécois? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
For his comment, of course, I'm very familiar with this situation. We've had a task force that has been meeting with the farmers and with people in the Saint-Amable area. This situation, of course, is serious, and that the golden nematode is going to be there for a long, long time, and we have to have a long-term plan that will help those farmers. We're keen to work with the farmers, with the government of Quebec, and we hope to have an overarching, holistic plan to deal with that shortly. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Bravo.
Thanks, Speaker. Roger. Mr. Speaker, there's still no compensation for 150,000 victims of Agent Orange. Veterans continue to express concern that the Minister's Department will only award disability pensions to those exposed to Agent Orange during 7 days between 1966 and 67. Will the Minister of Veterans Affairs commit today that he will deliver on the Prime Minister's election promise for a full and fair compensation package that is disability pensions for all veterans and civilians impacted by almost 30 years of chemical spraying in Gagetown?
Honourable the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I want to first of all thank the member for his personal support and the support of veterans. But Mr. Speaker, I caution him not to confuse our position with the position that his party and his government took, that he is a member of for 13 years and beyond, where they simply, this was their position, Mr. Speaker, deny till they die. Mr. Speaker, we're going to deliver on our commitment as we always do, Mr. Speaker. We have a track record of delivering on our commitments. You can't say the same thing for that party and that former government, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the people of southwest Nova Scotia learned that we have an agreement in principle to operate the Digby Ferry for the next 2 years.
Hear, hear.
This is great news for businesses and fish processors in southwest Nova Scotia and for the economy of New Brunswick. Unlike the dithering Liberals who sit on their hands until a crisis develops, can the Minister tell us what the next steps are to preserve this important service for the future of Eastern Canada?
Honourable the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from the South Shore as well as my colleague, the Minister of Transport, for this important act of assistance that they provided. Yesterday's announcement was the result of a rapid and effective response by the government with respect to this looming crisis left by our predecessor government. We worked with partners, municipalities and provinces to make this happen with Bay Ferries. We have found an interim solid solution, Mr. Speaker, going forward, but the economic impact of this particular crisis and the ferry service is approximately $20 million annually, which is 5 times the investment of the federal government to find the solution. The Government of Canada will continue to work with all of the stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. We'll work to promote the service and increase tourism and industry across Atlantic Canada.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster to Quitlam.
Speaker, on September 22nd, when asked if CF-18s were being prepared for deployment, the Minister told the media, and I quote, "I think I can deny it because no one's even brought it across my desk." But yesterday, the Minister admitted NATO were asking for 6 planes. We signed a foreign military sales contract, paid the deposit, and today the planes are ready to go. Now, I understand the Minister has no plans to send them today. But what about tomorrow? Mr. Speaker, will the Minister commit to telling Parliament and parliamentarians before he sends any CF-18s to Afghanistan?
Hear, hear. The Honourable the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I really appreciate this question. I'm going to say it. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it. We have no plan. We are not considering sending CF-18s to Afghanistan. The 6 CF-18s that I referred to yesterday are committed to the NATO reaction force, which it has nothing to do with Afghanistan, has nothing to do with Kosovo. We are not sending CF-18s to Afghanistan.
Honourable Member for New Westminster to Quitlam.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this isn't the first time the Minister has chosen different versions that he's putting forward. On August the 24th, the military denied that Leopard tanks would be deployed. Quote, "There are no plans to send tanks to Afghanistan." Mr. Speaker, the tanks are now on the ground in Afghanistan. Before any CF-18s are deployed to Afghanistan, will the Minister commit that he will stand in this House, deliver a ministerial statement informing the House of Commons and Canadians of any such action?
Hear, hear. Honourable the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I'll say again, we have no plans, no intentions, no musings about sending CF-18s to Afghanistan.
Honourable Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, this government has taken children from schools as baits to catch their parents. It has refused to help undocumented workers. It has turned its back on Canada's labour economy, which is begging for more skilled workers, not the deportation of the few workers they have. Instead of skirting the issue, will the Minister explain what he's going to do to legalise these workers so they can continue to contribute to Canada's economy and allow more skilled workers to come into this country, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for his newfound interest in this issue. Of course, under the previous government, he sat on his hands while the previous government deported over 100,000 undocumented workers out of this country, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't end there. They also cut settlement funding so that people who do arrive here legally had no chance to get language training, Mr. Speaker, career training, and even literacy training. Mr. Speaker, we've rectified that. We've announced $307 million in new funding so that all newcomers could realize the Canadian dream.
Honourable Member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquedoboit Valley.
The Member of Parliament for Egmont has been accusing the Conservative government of trying to cut jobs at the Canada Revenue Agency in Summerside. He's even raised it at committee. He's gone to all that trouble. I wonder if the Minister could update the House on the detailed discussion she's had with the Minister from Summerside about this important issue.
Honourable Minister of National Revenue.
I'd like to thank my colleague for this question. The MP for Summerside and his Liberal colleagues have never come directly to me with any questions or concerns. But I'm not surprised. Under the Liberal government, CRA jobs were lost in PEI and local Liberals were silent. In fact, since 1999, the Liberals cut 459 CRA positions in Summerside alone. Shame on the Liberals for their record and shame on them for trying to mislead those in Summerside and causing our excellent employees concern.
Honourable Member for Halton.
Mr. Speaker, last summer a family in my riding stood helplessly on a dock in Beirut watching as Lebanese citizens waving Canadian passports were evacuated while they stayed stranded. We now know Canada spent some $63 million evacuating 15,000 Lebanese Canadians, half of whom promptly returned to their homelands, and my constituents know it was not fair the way they were treated. Can the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship please tell the House how exactly we're going to prevent this from happening again, and if we have any attempts to review our outmoded dual citizenship laws, which the Liberals here did nothing about for 13 years.
The Honourable the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's fair to say that Canadians weren't prepared to ask people to pony up and try and figure out who should be paying in the middle of a war zone. But, Mr. Speaker, the issue that we're hearing about from Canadians is not whether or not there should be dual citizenship, Mr. Speaker. It's about what are the responsibilities that dual citizens have. One of the things that we hear, Mr. Speaker, is that many Canadians do believe that if you are not resident in the country for many years, that perhaps you do have some obligations to ensure that services are provided for while you're absent, that you provide for those services, so that when you return in your old age, they'll be there for those people and everyone, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Wascana.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a short question for the Prime Minister. I wonder if the Prime Minister could simply give Canadians the absolute assurance that Mr. Norman Spector, a former Conservative government operative, will never again speak in any capacity for the Government of Canada.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, that individual doesn't speak for the government, and if he speaks for anybody, he's certainly doing it for himself. That's all.
That will conclude question period for today. Order. À l'ordre.
Order.
Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day.
Oh, has he? Order. The Honourable Member for Davenport is rising on a point of order.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, during question period, the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship misled the House when he said about my newfound interest on the issue of undocumented workers. Mr. Speaker, I've been working on the issue for a very long time, and as he listened to question period and certainly during routine procedures, he would know that there are many petitions I've handed into this House dealing with the issue of undocumented workers. Clearly, the Minister is not paying attention to the petitions I myself and many people are handing into this House, and he obviously doesn't care about the issue of undocumented workers, and I'm very sorry for him misleading this House, and he should apologize to me and also to my constituents.
Well, rather than a point of order, it does sound like a matter for debate. We do have these kinds of suggestions made in the House from time to time on either side, so I think I'll treat the Honourable Member's point of order as having made his point in the debate, which no doubt will be ongoing. Orders of the day. Order du jour.
Government orders, government bills, commons. We're pleased to debate.
Resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-27, an act to amend the Criminal Code, dangerous offenders, and recognizance to keep the peace.
Resuming debate. When the House was last considering this matter, the Honourable the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development had the floor, and there are 17 minutes remaining in the time allotted for his remarks, and I therefore call on the Honourable, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development and the federal interlocutor for Métis and non-status Indians, who I believe will want to resume his remarks. Can we have a little order, please? Order. The Honourable the Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't appreciate just how unruly the House is.